She hit the ice before she even saw him. One moment, Isolde Crane was fighting the crowd on platform 7 of Harwick Royal Station, her single leather trunk dragging behind her, her coat whipping in the bitter January wind. The next she was falling. Her heel caught the edge of a frost-glazed step, her body tilted backward, and she had exactly 1 second of the particular helpless clarity that comes when a fall is already decided, and there is nothing left to do but wait for the impact. The hands caught her before the impact came. Not one hand. Two, both gripping her arms with a sureness that felt less like reaction and more like intention, as though the man behind her had seen it coming before she had, and had simply chosen not to let it happen. She grabbed his coat to steady herself. Thick wool. A ducal crest on the lapel button, stamped in silver. She looked up. The station fell silent. Not metaphorically. Not in the private, subjective way that moments of shock can distort time. The platform, 300 travelers, 6 porters, 2 station guards, and 1 very startled baggage handler, went genuinely, audibly quiet. Conversations dropped. Movement still. Even the winds seemed to pull back for a moment, as though it too wanted to see what happened next. Because the Duke of Ashenveil had just caught a woman no one recognized, on a public platform, with his hands, and he was still holding her. Nikolai Darius Ashenveil was 34 years old, and had not been publicly surprised in approximately 9 of them. He had navigated 3 succession crises, dissolved a parliamentary corruption ring that reached the upper corridors of the Crown's own advisory chambers, and once delivered a 7-minute address that ended a man's political career so quietly and precisely that the man himself didn't realize it had happened until he arrived at his office the following morning to find his resignation already drafted. He did not startle. He did not react without calculation. He was reacting now. The woman in his arms had dark hair half escaped from its pins, cheeks bitten red by the cold, and eyes, gray, unusual, startlingly direct, that looked up at him with something that was absolutely not gratitude. It was closer to assessment. She was looking at him the way a person looks at a situation they need to understand before they can manage it, cataloging him, taking inventory, deciding. He had never had anyone look at him quite like that at first glance. Most people looked away. Some looked down. The bolder ones looked with calculation, measuring his title, his influence, the potential uses of his attention. She was doing none of those things. She was simply looking at him. "Thank you," she said, once, crisply. Then she took hold of her own balance, straightened her coat with a single firm pull, and turned to retrieve her trunk from where it had slid against the platform railing. She didn't look back. Nikolai stood on platform 7 of Harwick Royal Station with his hands, still raised slightly from where they had held her, watching her disappear into the crowd of stranded travelers, her dark hair, her single trunk, her deliberate stride, and experienced the particular unfamiliar sensation of a man who has just made a mistake he cannot yet name. He should not have let her go. He didn't know why he thought it. It was unreasonable. It was not a thought that belonged to a man of his discipline, his precision, his carefully maintained detachment from things that complicated work. He filed it away under things to examine later, the way he filed everything that didn't yet have a category, and turned back to his secretary, who was hovering at his elbow with the polite, anxious expression of a man who very much wanted to ask what had just happened and understood at a cellular level that he should not. "The hotel carriage is waiting, Your Grace," his secretary said. "Yes," Nikolai said. He didn't move for another 3 seconds. Then he did. The blizzard had begun 20 minutes earlier over the northern pass and was coming south faster than anyone at Harwick Royal Station had anticipated. By the time Nikolai's carriage pulled up before the Crown Hotel, Harwick's only establishment capable of housing nobility, 3 stories of pale stone with gas lamps already burning against the premature dark. The sky had turned the color of pewter, and the wind was doing something architectural to the avenue's trees. Inside the station master's office, a notice was already being drafted. All rail service suspended pending weather assessment. Estimated resumption, 24 to 48 hours. Passengers are advised to seek accommodation in the Harwick district. Platform 7's 300 stranded travelers had approximately 45 minutes to process this information and respond accordingly. Nikolai processed it in 30 seconds and adjusted his schedule. He was traveling to Harwick on Crown business, a parliamentary land dispute that had been quietly destabilizing 3 noble houses for the better part of 8 months. the kind of dispute that did not officially exist in any public record, that no one with political sense would admit to in open conversation, and that required someone with the specific combination of legal knowledge, inherited authority, and the particular ruthlessness that comes from having spent a decade learning exactly where power is vulnerable, to resolve before it became the kind of scandal that moved newspapers. That was what Nikolai Ashenveil was, beneath the title and the reputation and the 7 years of careful public coldness. A resolver. The Crown sent him when situations had moved beyond diplomacy and required something more precise. He was very good at it. He found it, if not fulfilling, then at least clean. There was satisfaction in bringing order to things that had unraveled, in finding the exact point of failure and correcting it with surgical accuracy. He had applied this same methodology to his personal life. He did not form attachments that complicated his work. He did not pursue women who would require him to be present in ways his schedule did not permit. He attended the necessary social functions, maintained the necessary appearances, accepted the invitations that served a purpose, and declined the rest. And he had spent the 7 years since his broken engagement constructing a reputation for emotional unavailability so effectively and consistently that most of London's eligible population had simply stopped considering him as a possibility and moved on to more accessible targets. This suited him. He had decided it suited him, and he had not revisited that decision. He was doing something adjacent to revisiting it as he stepped into the Crown Hotel's lobby and handed his coat to the waiting staff, and he recognized the sensation with the mild alarm of a man who has maintained a controlled environment for a very long time and has just detected an unexpected variable. He did not see her in the lobby. He told himself he had not been looking. Isolde Crane had £17, 4 shillings, a second-class railway voucher that had just been rendered worthless by a blizzard, and the specific, contained calm of someone who has learned that panic is a luxury they cannot afford. She stood at the Crown Hotel's front desk and watched the clerk's face cycle through apology and distress as he explained the situation. No second-class rooms available. The lower wings had been allocated to a parliamentary group in residence since yesterday. The mid-range rooms had filled in the 20 minutes since the suspension notice had been posted. The only remaining space in the entire hotel was in the upper suite wing, and those rooms were priced well beyond. The anteroom, Isolde said. The clerk blinked. I beg your pardon? Suite anterooms. They're listed as separately bookable single-occupancy spaces in the Crown Railway Hotel Directory, Appendix B. She had memorized the directory 3 months ago when she had first begun planning this journey, because she could not afford errors and she could not afford surprises, and information was the only preparation available to someone in her position. The primary suite's anteroom is listed as an attachable booking at a rate commensurate with second-class accommodation. I would like to book it, if it is available. The clerk consulted his ledger. He consulted it twice. He looked at Isolde, at her single trunk, her wind-bitten coat, the reading glasses visible in her breast pocket, the expression of absolute unyielding patience on her face, and made an administrative error born of genuine overwork and a blizzard's worth of simultaneous crises. He assigned her the anteroom. He did not check which primary suite it belonged to. Isolde did not ask. She took the key, lifted her trunk, and followed the porter up 3 flights of stairs with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had learned to be grateful for small victories without examining them too carefully, because small victories had a way of revealing complications if you looked at them directly. The anteroom was small but warm. A narrow bed had been positioned against one wall. A writing desk sat beneath the window overlooking a courtyard that was rapidly disappearing under new snow. A fireplace shared a wall with the primary suite beyond the connecting door. She could hear, very faintly, the movement of someone on the other side. She ignored it. She unpinned her hair. It had been staging a rebellion since Platform 7, and she saw no reason to continue the fight in private. Removed her coat, retrieved her reading glasses from her trunk's inside pocket, and settled cross-legged on the floor with her legal documents arranged around her in the specific order she had developed over months of working through this particular nightmare. The solicitor's letter was in French, not because the solicitor was French, but because the original estate documents had been drawn up by her grandfather in a continental legal tradition that a certain category of negligent English solicitors exploited when they wanted their billing hours to appear more complex than the actual work required. Isolde's French was considerably better than her late father's solicitors. She had known this for 6 months. She had spent 6 months constructing the legal argument that would force him to acknowledge it in terms he could not dispute. She found the critical error on page 4, highlighted it with a precise line, made a note in her own shorthand in the margin. She was working through page 7 when the connecting door opened. She did not scream. She was not the screaming type. She looked up sharply, her hand moving automatically toward the fire poker she had positioned within reach. She had been traveling alone for 3 years, and the habits that kept her safe were not habits she apologized for, and then stopped, because it was him, the man from the platform, the man with the ducal crest and the certain hands and the gray-blue eyes that had looked at her with something she had deliberately not allowed herself to interpret in the 10 minutes since the platform, because interpretation led to expectation, and expectation was a thing she had excised from her life with considerable effort. He was standing in the connecting doorway in his shirt sleeves, no cravat, waistcoat unfastened, clearly having arrived and begun to make himself comfortable in the reasonable assumption that his anteroom was empty. He looked at her, at the papers, the floor, the reading glasses, the fire poker she was no longer reaching for, with the expression of a man who has just discovered that his assumptions about a situation require significant revision. The silence lasted 4 seconds. She counted them. "There has been a clerical error," she said. Her voice came out exactly as she intended. Clear, even informative rather than apologetic, because she had done nothing requiring apology. He looked at the papers spread around her. He looked at the reading glasses, which were slightly crooked because she perpetually forgot to straighten them. He looked at her face. "Evidently," he said, "I was assigned this room by the front desk clerk." She began collecting the papers into ordered piles, because if she was about to be asked to leave, she would leave organized. "I'll speak with the manager. I require only the night. Given the conditions outside, I assume there are limited alternatives, but I'll find something suitable." "There are no alternatives," he said. She stopped gathering. "The hotel reached capacity approximately 12 minutes ago." He moved further into the room, not toward her, but to the window, where he looked down at the courtyard below with the expression of someone assessing the parameters of an inconvenient situation. "My secretary confirmed it while I was removing my coat. The storm will last through tomorrow at minimum." Isolde looked at him steadily. He looked at the snow. "Your Grace," she said, because she had been raised with manners even when circumstances had stripped most else away, and because she understood that the shape of the next 30 seconds would determine the shape of the next 24 hours. "I have no intention of causing difficulty. If it would be more acceptable, I can take the chair in the corner of your primary suite and vacate first thing tomorrow without further interaction." He turned from the window. He looked at her for a moment. Not the way men usually looked at her when they found her unexpectedly in a room, with the particular assessment of a woman's appearance and circumstances that preceded either dismissal or an offer she did not want. He looked at her the way she had looked at page 4 of the solicitor's document, methodically, with genuine attention. "The chair is inadequate for sleeping," he said. "You can remain in the anteroom. I'll have a proper cot arranged if the bed is insufficient." He paused. "The room has a lock." She stared at him. "You're not asking me to leave. I'm aware. You don't know me." "I know," he said, with the particular neutrality of a man stating observable facts rather than making conversation, "that you were translating a French legal error in an estate document while sitting on the floor during a blizzard, and that you positioned the fire poker within reach as a precaution before you looked up to identify the source of the disruption." He paused. "In my experience, those are the behaviors of someone competent rather than dangerous." She looked at him. He was almost entirely serious. There was something at the corner of his mouth, not quite amusement, but its immediate neighbor. That suggested he was aware of how the sentence sounded, and had chosen to say it anyway. "I'll have them bring a cot," he said, and returned through the connecting door. He left it open by 4 inches, not wide enough for impropriety, wide enough for the warmth of the larger fireplace to filter through. Isolde sat back down on the floor. She retrieved her papers. She straightened her reading glasses. She looked at the 4-inch gap in the connecting doorway for approximately 3 seconds. Then she went back to page 7. She did not let herself think about the fact that the Duke of Ashenveil had just called her competent as though it were a compliment he meant, and had left a door open for warmth without saying that was why. She was not going to think about it. She thought about it until page 11. Dinner was brought to the suite's main room on a covered tray. The hotel had arranged a private table rather than require the Duke to navigate the crowded public dining room, which had been converted into emergency accommodation for travelers of lesser rank. His secretary, Grange, ate efficiently and retired early, citing the correspondence that had piled up during the afternoon's disruption. Nikolai found himself alone at a table set for 3, with a meal sized for 2 and the awareness, specific, quiet, difficult to categorize, that on the other side of a 4-inch gap in a doorway, Isolde Crane was eating whatever the hotel had sent to the anteroom and working on whichever page of those documents she had reached. He could hear her occasionally. Small sounds, the scratch of a pen, the soft percussive noise of a document being turned, once a brief, quietly professional sound of displeasure at something she'd found in the text. He ate his dinner. He worked on his own files for an hour. The land dispute had 17 interlocking elements and required him to hold a precise mental map of the competing interests, the legal precedents, and the political consequences of various resolutions, all simultaneously. He had nearly reached a viable approach when he heard a sound from the anteroom that was different from the others. Sharper, caught very quickly, controlled. A single breath, held and then released in the specific way of someone who has had to compose themselves in non-private spaces enough times that they have become very efficient at it. He set down his pen. He did not move. He understood, with the instinct of someone who had learned to read what people chose not to say, that what was happening in the anteroom was private and was not an invitation for acknowledgement. She had managed it. She would continue to manage it. She did not require his intervention. He heard her straighten her papers. He heard the small, deliberate sounds of someone reassembling their composure the way you reassemble a document, page by page, in order. Then silence. Nikolai sat at his desk for a moment. Then he stood, went to his writing table, found a sheet of hotel stationery, and wrote 6 words. "There is extra tea on the table." He folded it, crouched by the connecting door, and slipped it through the gap at floor level. He returned to his desk. A long moment passed. A folded note came back through the gap. He picked it up. I opened it. "Thank you." 2 words. Her handwriting was precise. The specific neatness of someone who had been trained to it early and had never stopped practicing because neatness was free, and it was a form of control over small things when large things were beyond control. He looked at those 2 words for longer than the occasion warranted. He put the note in his breast pocket. He did not examine why. He went back to his files, found that the land dispute required considerably more concentration than it had possessed an hour ago, and worked until midnight with only partial success. Morning came in thin gray light, and the sound of Isolde already awake. He could hear her moving before 6, the quiet, disciplined sounds of someone who had learned to be ready early, because readiness was the only advantage they could reliably manufacture. He dressed. He requested breakfast. When it arrived, enough for 2, a specification he had made without examining his own reasoning. He went to the connecting doorway and knocked on the frame. "There is breakfast, Miss Crane. You're welcome to sit at a proper table if you'd prefer it to the floor." A pause. "The floor is functional," she said. "So is the table." He kept his voice even. "It also has chairs. Generally considered an improvement." Another pause. Longer this time, which he was beginning to understand, meant she was running a rapid calculation rather than hesitating. The connecting door opened 6 inches further. She appeared in it, hair properly pinned, reading glasses folded in her pocket, legal documents tucked under her arm with the automatic efficiency of someone for whom documents were a permanent accessory. She looked at the table, then at him, then at the files under his own arm. "You're working through breakfast," she observed. "Yes. So am I." "Then we're both working through breakfast," he said. "Sit down, Miss Crane." She sat. She opened her documents. He opened his. For 11 minutes they worked in silence at opposite ends of a table that could have seated 8, and Nikolai found it, unexpectedly, with the mild alarm of a man encountering something he had not planned for. The most settled 11 minutes he had spent in longer than he could accurately calculate. Then, without looking up from her page, she said, "This precedent is cited incorrectly." He looked up. "Which precedent?" She turned the document and slid it across the table, pointing to a specific section with one precise finger. "Your parliamentary brief. I recognize the case reference from the 1857 Harwich County resolution. The initial ruling was overturned in 1861 on a point of hereditary title interpretation that directly affects how competing land claims are assessed. If whoever drafted this brief hasn't incorporated the 1861 amendment, the central argument has a structural gap that opposing counsel will find in approximately 20 minutes. Nikolai looked at the section she was indicating. He looked at his own notes for the 1861 amendment reference. He looked at its absence. She was correct. He looked at her. She had already returned to her own documents. "You've read the Harwick land dispute briefs," he said. "I read parliamentary records," she said. "They're informative. Most people find them impenetrable. Most people aren't attempting to understand the legal mechanisms that govern their circumstances." She made a small notation in her own margin. "The 1861 amendment affects 3 of the competing claims directly. You'll need to reframe your second approach entirely to account for it. Otherwise the argument will collapse at the 3rd challenge." Nikolai set down his pen. He looked at her. This woman who had been assigned his anteroom by an overworked clerk's administrative error, who composed herself in the dark with the practiced quietness of someone who had long since stopped expecting anyone to notice, who read parliamentary records for practical information and found critical errors in Crown-commissioned legal briefs while eating hotel toast, and felt something shift in him that he recognized, distantly, as the precursor to a problem. "Who are you?" he said. She looked up. Her gray eyes were direct, and this close. Across a breakfast table in January light, he could see what he had not been close enough to see on the platform. They were not simply gray. There were threads of something almost green in them, visible only at this proximity. And beneath the professional composure was a quality he recognized because he had cultivated its equivalent in himself. The specific clarity of someone who has learned to see accurately because accuracy is the only tool they can consistently afford. "Isolde Crane," she said. "My father was Viscount Crane. He died 8 months ago and left sufficient debt to occupy 3 solicitors and most of my available attention." She paused. "I'm a private language tutor currently based in Edinburgh. I'm traveling to London to force a legal resolution on his estate, which a negligent solicitor has been mismanaging since his death." Another pause, shorter. "I'm also apparently consulting on parliamentary land disputes, though I wasn't aware that was on my schedule." The corner of his mouth moved. He caught it. "The 1861 amendment," he said. "Page 43 of the Harwich County Archive, if you don't have it in your current files." She looked at him with that careful, measuring quality. Then she reached into her stack of documents and produced, from somewhere in the middle, precisely tabbed, a handwritten summary of the 1861 amendment with 3 key passages underlined. She slid it across the table without comment. He took it. He read it. He restructured his entire second approach in his head in approximately 4 minutes, while they both ate toast and the snow continued outside, and neither of them said anything else for a while, because neither of them needed to. The second day of the blizzard brought 5 additional guests into the Crown Suites orbit. The hotel, by mid-morning, had run out of alternatives. The lower wings were at capacity. The public dining room had been converted to sleeping space. And the manager, a man called Paris, who had aged approximately 3 years in the last 24 hours, had made the difficult decision to approach the maid, the Duke of Ashenveil, about temporarily opening the suite's secondary sitting room to 6 stranded travelers of sufficient rank to make the request plausible. Nikolai had agreed, because the alternative was leaving people in inadequate conditions during a life-threatening storm, and whatever his reputation suggested about his character, cold was cold. The 6 travelers arrived by noon. 2 were traveling couples, a retired general and his wife, a Scottish lord and his daughter returning from London. One was a quietly anxious vicar, and one was Lord Clement Vane. Isolde knew the name before he introduced himself. Most women in reduced circumstances who moved in the peripheries of London society knew the name Lord Clement Vane. He was 38, wealthy from shipping rather than inheritance, handsome in the blunt, uncomplicated way of a man who had never had cause to develop subtlety, and had a documented tendency to pursue women whose financial precarity made his attentions difficult to decline. He noticed Isolde within 5 minutes of arriving. She noticed him noticing, and quietly recalibrated her position in the room so that the retired general's wife was between them. This was not something she did consciously. It was the kind of spatial arithmetic that women in her circumstances learned to perform automatically. The way you learn to avoid ice on a platform, not with drama, but with the steady, practiced adjustment of someone who understands where the risks are. Nikolai noticed all of it. He was across the room, speaking with the Scottish lord about a border policy matter of mutual professional interest, maintaining precisely the right level of engaged attention to signal that the conversation was important, without revealing that the majority of his actual awareness was currently elsewhere. He watched Vane cross the room to where Isolde was seated near the window. He watched Vane arrange himself in the adjacent chair with the practiced ease of a man who did this often and found it reliable. He watched Vane say something that made Isolde produce the specific, careful smile she used when managing a situation, the smile that reached her eyes approximately not at all and was designed to be polite without being encouraging. He watched Vane place his hand over hers during a point he was making about property law, getting the law entirely wrong. Nikolai set down his glass. "Forgive me," he said to the Scottish lord, with the particular tone that communicated that the conversation was paused rather than ended, and crossed the room. He did not hurry. He did not need to hurry. He positioned himself beside Isolde's chair with the unhurried authority of someone for whom rooms rearrange themselves naturally, and looked at Vane. "Lord Vane," he said pleasantly, "you were discussing the property law precedent. I believe you'll find the 1857 ruling actually supports the opposing position. Miss Crane, would you explain? You referenced the correct interpretation this morning with considerably more precision." Every eye in the room turned to Isolde. Vane removed his hand. Isolde looked at Nikolai, one quick, unreadable look, and then turned to the room with the composure of someone who has just been handed an unexpected gift and is deciding whether to accept it. She explained the precedent. Clearly, concisely, correctly. Vane was silent. The retired general's wife made an approving sound. The Scottish lord asked a follow-up question that Isolde answered with equal precision. When the general conversation resumed, Nikolai remained where he was, standing beside her chair, not touching, not hovering, simply present in the way that made Vane's next attempt to reposition himself unnecessary, because the space was already occupied. Later, when the room had shifted into smaller conversations, and Vane had been successfully redirected toward the vicar, who was unlikely to be troubled by his attentions, Isolde looked up at Nikolai from her chair. "You didn't need to do that," she said quietly. "I know," he said. "I was managing it. I know that too." She looked at him for a moment. "Then why?" "Because he was wrong about the law," Nikolai said, "and it was a good opportunity to have it corrected." He kept his voice neutral. He looked across the room at something else. She was quiet for 3 seconds. "That's not why," she said. He did not answer. He also did not deny it. The evening meal was taken communally, the hotel's staff having arranged a long table in the suite's main room to accommodate all 8 occupants. It was, by any objective measure, an awkward arrangement. Nikolai Ashenveil was not accustomed to communal dinners with near strangers, and the social geometry of the seating had the particular charged quality of a situation where everyone was aware of something that no one was directly addressing. Vane spent dinner attempting to engage Isolde from 3 seats away. She responded with the minimum of courtesy required to satisfy social convention and devoted the rest of her attention to the retired general's wife, who had taken a decided liking to her and was telling her an extremely detailed story about a property dispute in Northumberland in 1847 that was, Nikolai observed, actually relevant to the parliamentary brief. Isolde was taking notes in her program margin. He watched her do this and felt something in his chest do something he did not have immediate vocabulary for. After dinner, as the others dispersed, the couples to their allocated spaces, the vicar to his prayers, Vane to what was probably a flask he'd had the foresight to bring, Nikolai found himself in the suite's main room with Isolde, the fire burning down, the snow still pressing against the windows, and the particular quiet of a shared space when all the other occupants have withdrawn. She was reorganizing her notes at the writing desk. He was standing at the window with a glass of something he had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago. "He'll be more direct tomorrow," Nikolai said. She didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "Yes," she said. "If he becomes difficult, I've managed men like Lord Vane before, Your Grace." She said it without heat and without the specific brittleness of someone who found the topic painful. It was simply a fact. She had the calm of someone who has encountered a category of problem enough times that it has become administrative rather than frightening. That calm somehow made it worse rather than better. "I know," he said. "I also know you shouldn't have to." She stopped writing. She didn't turn around. "No," she said, after a moment, "I shouldn't." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved through the eaves of the old hotel in long, low notes. Nikolai looked at her profile, the straight line of her shoulders, the precise way she held her pen, the single dark curl that had escaped her arrangement again and was resting against the back of her neck. "My fiancée," he said, without planning to. 7 years ago, her name was Cecily. Isolde set down her pen. She turned to look at him. "She was in love with my brother," he said. "I knew about it for approximately 6 months before I ended the engagement. I could see it every time they were in the same room. The way she came alive when he arrived. The way she watched him when she thought no one was observing. My brother was entirely unaware. He is a decent man who would have been mortified had he known." He paused. "I broke the engagement quietly, gave no specific reason, absorbed the social consequences, and arranged for my brother to spend 2 years at our estates in Portugal, where the distance allowed things to resolve themselves without damage to either of them." Isolde was looking at him with an expression he couldn't entirely read. "They married 3 years later," he said. "They have 2 children. They are, by any available evidence, genuinely happy." "And you?" she said. "I left England for a year. When I came back, I had a reputation for coldness that I found professionally useful and personally convenient." He looked at his glass. "I've maintained it deliberately." "That was either the most selfless thing I've ever heard," Isolde said carefully, "or the most self-destructive." "I was told at the time that it was noble," he said. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her. She was looking at him with the complete, clear-eyed attention she gave to everything. Not with pity, not with the particular social warmth that people offered when they wanted to be seen as compassionate, but with genuine, unvarnished assessment. "No," he said. "They're not." She was quiet for a moment. "My father," she said then, "was the kindest man I knew for the first 15 years of my life. He reads to me every evening. He taught me French when my governess said I was too young to learn it properly. He believed, genuinely and without cynicism, that intelligence in a woman was an asset rather than a liability." She paused. "He also gambled away our estate, our savings, my mother's jewelry, the trust he had been managing for my younger brother, and the goodwill of approximately 40 people who had trusted him with varying degrees of financial dependency." She paused again. "He did both of those things simultaneously. I have spent 8 months trying to reconcile them." "Have you managed it?" Nikolai said. "No," she said simply. "But I've accepted that I probably won't, and that loving him anyway is not the same as excusing him." She looked at the fire. "I miss him. That's the part that still surprises me. That I can miss someone who caused this much damage and mean it without reservation." Nikolai looked at her for a long time. "Grief is not a referendum on judgment," he said. She turned to look at him. Something shifted in her expression, very briefly, just at the edge of her composure, like a door opened an inch in a dark room. "No," she said quietly. "It isn't." They sat in the fire's declining warmth for another hour, not always speaking, sometimes working. Occasionally one of them said something and the other responded, and it became, gradually and without announcement, the kind of conversation that has no beginning or planned shape, the kind that simply happens between 2 people who have both spent a long time in rooms where real conversation was not available. At some point, the fire needed tending, and he tended it without making a production of it. At some point, her tea went cold, and he replaced it from the pot without being asked, because he happened to be standing, and it was the practical thing to do. At some point, she said something about the Northumberland property dispute from the general's wife's story, and he said something about the 1843 precedent it connected to, and they argued about the relative merits of 2 different legal interpretations for 20 minutes, with the specific, energized quality of 2 people who rarely find someone worth arguing with. When she finally said she should sleep, it was past midnight, the storm still pressing against the glass. The hotel silent around them. She stood and gathered her notes and looked at him across the room with the expression she used when she was about to say something she had decided was worth saying, despite the risk. "Your Grace," she said. "Nikolai," he said. It came out before he had examined whether to say it. She looked at him. He looked back. "Nikolai," she said, testing the shape of it. "The brief, your second approach, if you restructure it around the 1861 amendment as the anchor rather than the 1857 ruling, you can actually use the competing claims against each other. They cancel in a way that removes the most volatile element from the dispute entirely." She paused. "I was thinking about it during dinner." He stared at her. "That is exactly right," he said. "I know," she said, with the quiet certainty of someone stating a fact rather than seeking validation. "Good night." She went through the connecting door. 4 inches, then 6. She stopped and pushed it open a full foot before continuing, and did not look back to see if he noticed. He noticed. He stood in the main room of the suite with the dying fire behind him and the sound of the blizzard outside, and the door open a foot wider than it had been, and felt the particular, specific, dangerous warmth of a man who has just realized that a controlled environment has been irrevocably altered and cannot make himself want to correct it. The trains resumed the following afternoon at 3 o'clock. The announcement came through the hotel at 2, a porter moving from room to room, knocking and delivering the news with the slightly martyred relief of a man who had spent 48 hours managing a crisis and was beginning to see the end of it. Nikolai was at his desk reviewing the restructured brief. It was better, demonstrably and significantly better. And he had been working through the implications since 6 that morning with something that felt less like professional obligation and more like the particular engagement of a man working on a problem he finds genuinely interesting for the first time in some years. He heard her moving in the anteroom. He heard the sounds of packing, deliberate, efficient, the trunk being reorganized with the same ordered precision she applied to everything. He set down his pen. He had done something the previous evening. After she had gone through the connecting door and he had stood in the main room for longer than was warranted, that he had not done on impulse in 7 years. He had written 2 letters. The first was to his personal solicitor in London, with instructions to investigate the management of the late Viscount Crane's estate and identify what legal remedies were available for the irregularities that a credentialed language tutor with better French than her father's solicitor had clearly already documented. The second was to the Crown Hotel's station liaison, arranging for a private railway carriage to be attached to the London Express. He had told himself the second was because he had additional work to complete on the journey and required an uninterrupted environment. He had not told himself this with any particular conviction. He was in the main room when she emerged from the anteroom with her trunk, her coat buttoned, her documents in their leather case, her reading glasses in her pocket, her hair done with the precise efficiency that was becoming. He recognized this with the resigned clarity of a man watching an inevitable conclusion approach, one of the many things he found himself cataloging about her against his better judgment. She looked at him across the room. "The trains are running," she said. "Yes, I should go down to the station for the second-class queue." She said it without self-pity, simply a fact about the logistics of her day. "There is a private carriage attached to the London Express," he said. "My party has more space than required. You're welcome to use the excess." She looked at him. "Your Grace," she said. "Nikolai." A pause. "Nikolai." She said it without looking away. "I can't accept. It's inconvenient," he said, "to have a significant legal analysis interrupted by a 48-hour blizzard and then left incomplete because one of the participants has to stand in a queue." He kept his voice entirely reasonable. "The analysis is unfinished. You identified 3 structural problems in my brief. I've resolved one. You haven't had the opportunity to verify the other 2. She stared at him. "That is the most implausible justification I have ever heard. Is it inaccurate?" "That's not the same question." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She looked at him for a long moment. Running the calculation, he could see it happening, weighing the practical reality of standing in a second-class queue for 40 minutes in January cold against whatever the cost of accepting this offer was, in terms she had not yet fully articulated. He watched her reach the end of the calculation. "The other 2 structural issues," she said. "Yes. I'm not doing this for social reasons," she said. "I'm doing it because the brief matters and the analysis is incomplete." "Obviously," he said, with perfect neutrality. She picked up her trunk. "Well," she said, "then let's go." The private carriage was warm and quiet. His secretary settled into the forward compartment with a stack of correspondence, the implicit understanding being that the main cabin was for working. Nikolai and Isolde sat on opposite sides of a narrow table, the English countryside moving past the windows in shades of white and pale gray, the brief and its supporting documents spread between them. They worked for the better part of an hour. It was, objectively speaking, excellent work, the kind of focused, productive analysis that his usual professional advisors rarely achieved because they were too aware of the hierarchy to disagree with him freely and too cautious to follow a line of reasoning wherever it led. Isolde was neither cautious nor aware of hierarchy in any way that appeared to constrain her. She followed arguments to their conclusions, said plainly when a conclusion was wrong, and offered alternatives with the brisk efficiency of someone who had long since stopped waiting to be invited to contribute. At one point he said something she found incorrect, and she said no with such immediate clarity that Grange looked up sharply from the forward compartment before catching himself and looking back down. Nikolai looked at her. She looked back. "You're wrong," she said simply. "The 1061 amendment doesn't permit that interpretation. Here," she turned a page, pointed, read the subordinate clause. He read the subordinate clause. He was wrong. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said, and made a note. He watched her make the note and felt something in him. Some old, specific thing that had been very carefully managed for a long time. Shift in a direction he had not authorized. She fell asleep approximately 90 minutes out of London. It was not dramatic. She simply stopped writing mid-notation, the pen stilling and her head inclined slightly toward the window, and her breathing settled. The documents were still in her lap. The pen was still in her hand. He reached across the table and caught the papers before they could slide. He set them on the table in the order they had been in. He looked at her for a moment, at the clean line of her profile, the escaped curl that had reappeared against the back of her neck, the particular expression of her face when it was not actively managing anything, which was softer and younger and somehow more difficult to look at than her usual composed alertness. He looked at the countryside going past. He thought about the brief and the 1861 amendment, and the specific way she said no when she meant it, and the note she had sent back through the gap in the connecting door that he had put in his breast pocket without examining why. He thought about the fact that London was now 40 minutes away. He thought about the fact that he had spent the last 2 days wanting to ask her a great number of things he had not yet found the appropriate moment to ask, and that the appropriate moment was narrowing to a point. She woke when London's outskirts began to appear. The gradual transition from snow-covered fields to snow-covered rooftops, the thickening of buildings, the first sounds of the city's particular noise seeping in around the carriage's edges. She was alert immediately. No drowsiness. She looked at the window, assessed the location, and reached for her documents with the automatic efficiency of someone accustomed to walking in transit. She found them already ordered on the table. She looked at them. She looked at him. He was looking out the window. "The third structural issue," she said. "In the brief, the competing claim from the secondary heir. I think there's a way to address it that doesn't require bringing it before the full parliamentary committee. You could resolve it at the county level if you file the amended claim within the next 14 days. She paused. "I can write up the specific approach tonight if you'd like. I have the relevant precedent notes from the Northumberland case." He looked at her. "Miss Crane," he said. "Isolde," she said, which was the most surprising thing she had said in 48 hours of consistently surprising things. "Isolde," he said. The name had its own particular weight in his mouth. He noted this and continued. "You've spent 2 days resolving a crown land dispute that 6 professional advisors have failed to fully address in 8 months. You've identified 3 critical, structural errors and proposed solutions to all 3, and you are now offering to write up the resolution tonight, in addition to managing your own considerable legal challenges." She looked at him. "And?" "Why," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Because it's a solvable problem," she said. "And because I know how to solve it." She paused. "And because—" She stopped. "Because," he said. She looked at him directly. "Because I have been entirely without useful work for 3 years," she said, quietly and without self-pity. "I have been tutoring children in grammar and pronunciation because it is what was available and it pays adequately. I am good at it, and I do not resent it, but it is not—" She stopped again. "It is not this." He understood. Not the words of it, the thing beneath the words. "No," he said, "it is not this." The train was slowing. London's platforms were appearing through the window, the familiar noise and crowd of the capital after the blanketed quiet of Harwick. In a few minutes the door would open and the ordinary world would come back in, with all its requirements and categories and the specific, unbendable logic of what was and was not possible between a duke and a viscount's indebted daughter on a platform in January. He stood when the train stopped, because he had been raised to, and because the movement gave him something to do with his hands. He helped her down onto the platform. She took his hand to descend. A brief, practical contact, gloved, appropriate, and then released it and stood in the noise and crowd of London Victoria Station with her leather case under her arm and her single trunk at her feet, and her grey eyes that were sometimes green looking at him with the expression of someone who is preparing a formal farewell. "Thank you," she said, "for the carriage, and for Harwick." "Thank you," he said, "for the brief." She almost smiled. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not the careful, managed smile she used for Lord Vane in situations that required management, but something smaller and less controlled. "The 1861 amendment," she said. "I'll file the amended claim by Friday," he said. "Good." She picked up her trunk. She looked at him once more. The full, direct look, the cataloging one, the one he was beginning to suspect she used only when something mattered. "Goodbye, Nikolai. Goodbye, Isolde." She turned and walked into the crowd. He stood on the platform and watched her until the crowd took her, and felt the specific, particular, named thing, the one he had spent the journey avoiding naming, settle into him with the quiet, irrevocable permanence of a decision that has already been made. He should not have let her go. This time he knew exactly why. London opened its winter season the way it always did, with the Ashworth charity concert, a carefully calibrated display of the Crown's cultural patronage that managed to be simultaneously a genuine musical event and the season's first major occasion for society to perform itself at. Nikolai attended as part of the Crown's parliamentary delegation. He sat in the Duke's box, which had a clear sight line to approximately 2/3 of the concert hall's seating capacity, and spent the first movement of Handel's water music scanning the audience, with the automatic efficiency of a man who catalogues rooms by habit. He found her in the upper gallery in 4 minutes. He registered that this was unreasonable. The upper gallery held 316 people. He had not been looking for anyone in particular. The concert hall was lit primarily by candles, and the distance between the Duke's box and the upper gallery was significant. He registered all of this with complete accuracy and found that it made no practical difference. She was there, seated slightly apart from the group she had come with, an elderly woman he didn't recognize, probably her current employer, wearing a dark blue dress that he hadn't seen before and the reading glasses she kept forgetting to straighten. She was not reading. She was listening to the music with the complete unself-conscious attention she brought to things she found genuinely interesting. Her head slightly tilted, her hands still in her lap. A man took the seat beside her. Nikolai looked at the man. Lord Clement Vane. His presence in the upper gallery was unusual. Vane typically occupied better seating than this, which suggested he had specifically arranged to be in the upper gallery this evening, which in turn suggested he had known she would be here. Nikolai watched Vane lean close and say something. Isolde produced a careful, professional smile. Vane said something else. The careful smile remained unchanged. Vane's hand moved to the arm of her chair, not touching her but positioned with the deliberate proximity of someone establishing territory. At intermission, Nikolai rearranged his evening. The lower foyer was crowded with the usual intermission performance, London's finest managing their refreshments and their social standing simultaneously. Nikolai descended from the Duke's box, spoke briefly to 2 people who approached him with the efficiency of a man who has a specific destination, and positioned himself in Isolde's path at the base of the stairs from the upper gallery. She turned the corner with the elderly woman on her arm and stopped. She was composed instantly. He watched it happen, the flicker of surprise, the rapid calculation, the resumption of bearing, all in approximately 1 second. The foyer had gone quiet in the particular way it went quiet when something socially significant was happening in its center. He was aware of this. He had chosen this foyer, this moment, specifically because he was aware of it. "Miss Crane," he said, his voice carried. "Your Grace." Her voice was perfectly even. "How unexpected. I hoped I might see you this evening," he said. He said it clearly. He said it in a foyer full of London's most attentive social observers, in a voice that did not require straining to hear, with the specific delivery of a man who has decided to stop being careful about what he makes apparent. Every relevant person in the foyer heard it. He watched Isolde understand exactly what he was doing. The quick, reading look, the moment of processing, the slight lift of her chin as she accepted the situation with the grace that was, he had come to understand, entirely characteristic of her. "The concert is exceptional this evening," she said pleasantly. "Have you been enjoying the program?" "The Handel particularly," he said. He offered his arm to the elderly woman first, the correct social order. "Lady Ellsworth, I presume. Nikolai Ashenveil. I believe you know my mother." Lady Ellsworth looked at him with eyes that had seen 70 years of London society and missed approximately none of it. "I did indeed," she said. "You look rather more like her than your father, I'm glad to say." She took his arm without hesitation. "And considerably less terrifying than your reputation." "I'm told the reputation is somewhat exaggerated," he said. Only somewhat, I think, she said, glancing between him and Isolde with the serene satisfaction of a woman who has just correctly diagnosed a situation she finds pleasing. They took refreshments. He remained beside Isolde with the deliberate, unhurried presence of someone who has decided where he is going to stand and does not require external permission to stand there. When Vane appeared at the edge of their small group with the expression of a man recalculating his approach, Nikolai looked at him once. Vane recalculated. "You're going to cause talk," Isolde said quietly, when Lady Ellsworth had been drawn into conversation by an acquaintance, and they had a moment that was as close to private as a crowded foyer permitted. "Yes," he said. That was deliberate. "Yes." She looked at him, the full, cataloging look. "Why?" "Because Vane needs to understand that the approach he's planning is not viable," he said, "and because telling him directly would be both undignified and less effective than the alternative." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that the only reason?" He looked at her. "No," he said. The bell rang for the second half. They returned to their respective seating. He looked up at the upper gallery once, at the beginning of the second movement, and found her already looking down at the Duke's box. She looked away first. He did not. Later, 3 days later, in the cold clarity of a morning that had followed a restless night, during which she had made her decision and unmade it approximately 6 times, Isolde would tell herself that she had known, from the moment she saw him in that foyer, what was coming. Not with hope, because she had disciplined hope out of herself years ago. With something more complicated, the knowledge that a thing is happening combined with the inability to determine whether it is a thing one can survive. What she could not have known, what she had no framework for, was Lord Clement Vane's capacity for petty and targeted malice. The piece appeared in the London Illustrated Register on a Thursday morning. She read it at Lady Ellsworth's breakfast table, in a voice that did not change and hands that did not shake, and then set the paper down and looked out the window at the winter street. It was comprehensive. Her father's debts itemized with the specific cruelty of accuracy, the second-class railway voucher, the administrative error that had placed her in the Duke's anteroom, framed, with careful implication, as something other than an error, the 2 weeks of employment history, and the centerpiece, a delicately worded suggestion that Miss Isolde Crane, daughter of the disgraced Viscount Crane, had engineered proximity to the Duke of Ashenveil with the specific intention of leveraging social scandal into matrimonial advantage. Everything in it was either true or technically unverifiable. That was the art of it. Vane had not made a single claim that could be directly refuted. He had simply arranged the true things in an order that created a picture, and the picture was designed to destroy her. Lady Ellsworth said something. Isolde heard it without processing it. She was already writing in her head. The letter to Nikolai, the one she would send today, the one that would close this before it compounded into something she could not manage. She went to her room and wrote it. It was brief. It was precise. It told him that she was aware of the register piece, that she was releasing him from any social implication created by his public acknowledgement at the concert, and that she had accepted a position in Bath, beginning the following Monday. She did not tell him why she was going to Bath. She told herself it was the practical choice. There was good employment there, a family requiring a French tutor, a distance from London sufficient to allow things to settle. She sealed the letter and gave it to the hall porter before she could change her mind. Then she sat in her room and looked at the window and felt, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has made themselves into something very practical and very capable, the particular ache of a hope she had not admitted to having until the moment she'd decided to abandon it. Nikolai received the letter at 9 in the morning. He read it once, standing at his desk. He set it down. He picked it up and read it again. His secretary appeared at the study door with the morning's correspondence. He looked at Nikolai's face and then very quietly withdrew and closed the door. Nikolai stood at his desk with the letter in his hand, and the register spread open on the table beside it, which he had already read, which he had already understood, which he had already traced to its source with the methodical precision he applied to things that required resolution. Vane. The timeline was clear. The concert, the dismissal, the access to the Register Society column that Vane's shipping money had purchased over the years. The specific, targeted nature of the piece, which revealed details that required active research, told him everything about the intention behind it. He set the letter down. He looked at his calendar. He looked at the clock. Then he put on his coat and went to find his solicitor. He spent 3 hours with him. The solicitor, a man named Harwick who had served the Ashenveil family for 22 years, and had learned that when Nikolai used a certain particular tone, it was wise to simply execute the instructions and ask clarifying questions later. Took detailed notes and asked very few clarifying questions. At the end of 3 hours, Nikolai had initiated the following: a full legal audit of the late Viscount Crane's estate, with specific attention to evidence of mismanagement by the solicitor of record, the establishment of an independent trust in Isolde Crane's name, to be managed by her sole signature, to hold the estate's rightful insurance settlement. Once recovered a letter to the register's editor that was not threatening but was, Harwick would later describe it, clarifying in a way that made the editor's professional future contingent on the paper's editorial decisions, and a letter to Lord Clement Vane that was also not threatening but that contained a very precise and well-documented summary of certain irregularities in Vane's shipping enterprise that Nikolai had been aware of for approximately 8 months from his Crown advisory work, and had simply not yet had occasion to bring to anyone's attention. He told himself none of this was about Isolde. He drove past Lady Ellsworth's house on his way back. He told himself that was a coincidence of route. He was not a convincing liar, even to himself. He went home. He wrote a note, brief, in his own handwriting, on plain stationery with no ducal heading. At the bottom of the legal correspondence his solicitor would send to her, it said, "This is not an obligation. This is not charity. This is what should have been done for you by people who owed you better. You owe me nothing. N." He folded it into the legal envelope. He sent it. Then he stood at his study window for a while and looked at London and thought about frozen platforms and 4-inch gaps in doorways and the specific quality of a woman who says no with absolute immediate certainty when she means it. He thought about the fact that he had, on that platform, let her walk away into a crowd, and that this had been the first of several mistakes, each somewhat larger than the last. He thought about what he was going to do about it. The answer arrived the following morning. Not the answer to his thinking. He already knew that. The answer arrived in the form of Lady Ellsworth's parlor maid, who knocked on the Ashenveil townhouse door at 10 in the morning and delivered a sealed envelope with the instruction that it was from Lady Ellsworth herself and should be given to the Duke directly. He opened it. She is still here. She read the note last night and has been in her room since. She has not cancelled the bath position, but she has not confirmed it either. I suggest, Your Grace, that you stop being a duke for approximately half an hour and simply come to the door. I will let you in, M. Ellsworth. Nikolai put the note in his pocket, called for his coat, and left without telling Grange where he was going, which was itself a notable event. He walked. Lady Ellsworth's house was 12 minutes from his own, and he was aware, with the clear-eyed precision that was perhaps the most consistent thing about him, that these 12 minutes were likely the last ones in which he could still be the man he had been before a frozen railway platform in January. He was not certain he wanted to be that man anymore. He knocked. Lady Ellsworth opened the door herself, which suggested she had been watching from the front window, and looked at him with the expression of a woman who has correctly predicted something and is not even slightly surprised. "She's in the parlor," she said. "I'll be in the garden." She looked at the sky, which was gray and approximately 34 degrees. Inspecting the roses. "It's January," Nikolai said. "They require inspection regardless of the month," she said firmly, and disappeared down the hall. He went to the parlor. She was standing by the window when he came in. Not sitting, standing, which meant she had heard the knock and had been waiting for this. Standing because standing meant she was ready, rather than caught off guard. She was wearing a dark green dress he hadn't seen before. Her hair was properly arranged. Her reading glasses were in her pocket. She looked, at first glance, precisely as composed as always. At second glance, which he was now practiced at, which he knew to take, there were things beneath the composure. The slight tension in her shoulders, the way her hands were still, which was not her natural state, the quality of her gaze when she turned to look at him, which was not composed at all. She was afraid, not of him. He understood her well enough to know that she did not find him frightening. She was afraid of something that his presence represented, something to do with hope and its consequences, something that her long practice of practicality had not quite managed to excise despite what he suspected had been genuine effort. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "Probably not," he agreed. He remained by the door. He did not close the distance because this was not a conversation that should be managed with proximity, and he knew it. "The legal matter," she said. "It wasn't necessary. It was entirely necessary," he said. "It should have been done 8 months ago by people with the relevant authority and obligation to do it. I simply happened to be in a position to do it more quickly. You can't—" She stopped. "This is what I mean. This is precisely what I mean." She turned back to the window for a moment. "You do things and they're not calculated, or that's what makes them more—" She stopped again. He waited. "I cannot be someone that a powerful man finds interesting until it becomes inconvenient," she said, finally and directly. "I watched my father make decisions he later reconsidered for 30 years, and I know the shape of it. I know what it looks like when a person invests in something that seems valuable and then reassesses when the cost becomes clear. And the cost of this—" She gestured vaguely between them. "The cost of whatever this is, for you, is not trivial." "No," he said, "it isn't." "Then—" "I have not once," he said. "In 3 weeks. Not in the anteroom, not on the train, not at the concert, not this morning. Looked at the cost." She was silent. "I'm not telling you that the cost doesn't exist," he said. "I'm telling you that I've been looking at other things." He paused. "Specifically at you." She turned from the window. She looked at him with the full, direct, cataloging look. The one he understood now was what she did when something mattered enough to deserve her complete attention. "I don't need to be saved," she said. "I know," I was managing. "I know that too." "Then what is it that you're actually offering me?" she said. Not with anger. With the clear, direct request for information that was simply how she asked things. "Because I need to understand it accurately." He looked at her. "I'm offering you the conversation that got interrupted by a train arriving in London," he said. "And the ones after it. And, if you'll allow it, all the ones after those." He paused. "I'm not offering to resolve your circumstances. You are capable of resolving them yourself, which you have demonstrated comprehensively. I'm offering to be in the room while you do." She looked at him for a long time. "You're the strangest Duke I have ever met," she said. "You've mentioned," he said. "Twice. It remains accurate," she said. "I'll take it as consistent," he said. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not the careful smile. The real one, the small, uncontrolled one that appeared when something genuinely reached her, and that he had been collecting, he realized, from their very first conversation. She took one step toward him. He covered the rest. 6 months later, the announcement appeared in the London Gazette. 3 sentences. The engagement of His Grace Nikolai Darius Ashenveil, Duke of Ashenveil, to Miss Isolde Crane, daughter of the late Viscount Crane. The ceremony will be held at Ashenveil Chapel. Guests by private invitation. London society spent a fortnight discussing it. The disparity of rank, the speed of the courtship, the question of what exactly had happened at the Harwich Crown Hotel during the January blizzard, which remained a matter of some creative speculation. The London Illustrated Register, which had undergone a recent and somewhat abrupt change in editorial policy, ran a brief congratulatory notice that was notable primarily for what it did not say. Lord Clement Vane attended fewer events than previously. His shipping enterprise was undergoing an unrelated but apparently quite involved Crown advisory review. Nikolai and Isolde did not read the social columns. They had, in the 6 months between the parlor conversation and the engagement announcement, developed the particular, joint immunity to external opinion that forms between two people who are too interested in each other's thoughts to expend much energy on anyone else's. They worked, frequently, at the same table. She had declined, with characteristic directness, a position in his household that was simply ornamental, and had instead spent 4 months completing the legal resolution of her father's estate, with Harwick's assistance and her own French, which turned out to be considerably more than adequate for the task. The settlement was recovered, the negligent solicitor was removed from practice, and the trust she had established held enough to give her brother the start he deserved. She had also, at Nikolai's request, and then increasingly at her own initiative, reviewed 6 additional Crown land disputes in an unofficial capacity that she described as consulting and he described as essential. The work was good. She was better at it than most of the people he paid. He told her this. She told him she knew, and he should probably pay her. And he laughed. The real laugh. The one she had been responsible for more times in 6 months than the preceding 7 years combined. The wedding was small, intentionally, specifically, unapologetically small. The chapel held 40 people, all of whom were there because they meant something rather than because they were required by social convention to be present. Lady Ellsworth sat in the front row and did not pretend she wasn't crying. Grange in the back row, appeared to be very intensely focused on the order of service. Nikolai stood at the altar and watched Isolde walk toward him and felt the particular, impossible thing that a man feels when he has spent a long time living inside discipline and precision and careful management, and then encounters, without planning or expectation, the specific person who makes all of that discipline feel like it was simply practice for this, for being exactly here, in exactly this moment, with exactly this woman walking toward him with her gray eyes that were sometimes green, and her reading glasses in her pocket, and the measured, deliberate stride of someone who has decided that something is worth moving toward. She reached him. He took her hand. "Ready?" he said. She looked at him. The full look, the one that meant it mattered. "Yes," she said. They went back to Harwick in February. Not because it was required, not for any professional reason. By private, mutual, unspoken agreement they went, because it was where it had begun, and some things deserved to be returned to with intention. The station was clear and cold. The platform was swept clean, the ice long since gone, the January storm a memory. The winter light was pale and very still. They stood on platform 7. Just the two of them. No secretary, no porter, no carriage. The station was quiet in the particular way that northern English stations are quiet in February, vast and empty and full of the sound of their own breathing. "You let me go," she said. "I did," he said. She looked at him. "You shouldn't have." He looked back at her. This woman who had caught herself before the fall and then been caught anyway. Who had sent a note back through a 4-inch gap that said thank you in handwriting like a decision. Who had told him he was wrong about a precedent and been right, and said no with absolute clarity when she meant it, and cried quietly in the dark with the practiced composure of someone who had learned to need very little, and who had, despite all of that learning, despite every careful calibration, looked at him across a breakfast table in January light and let him see the thing beneath the composure. "No," he said. "I shouldn't have." He didn't let her go now. The platform was empty. The February sky was pale. Somewhere behind them a train was beginning its slow approach, filling the station with the familiar gathering noise of a world in motion. They didn't move. Some things are worth being still for. Love does not announce itself. It does not arrive with ceremony or ask for your readiness. It arrives sometimes on a frozen platform on a January afternoon, in a pair of hands that catch you before you fall, and it asks only one thing of you afterward. Don't walk away. If this story moved you, if you felt something on that platform, or in that quiet anteroom, or at the end of a train journey that neither of them wanted to end, then you already know why this channel exists. Stories like this one are built on the belief that the most powerful thing in any room is a love that neither person planned for. The kind that finds you in blizzards and bad solicitors' letters and 4-inch gaps in connecting doors. The kind that is less about grand declarations and more about someone saying, "I have not once looked at the cost." Subscribe now so you never miss a story. Leave a comment telling us your favorite moment. Was it the note slipped under the door, the breakfast table argument, or the moment he said 4 words in a foyer full of people who were watching? And share this with someone today who deserves to be reminded that real love is specific and patient and worth every frozen platform. Thank you for staying until the end. You are exactly the kind of person this story was made for.